Mysterious disappearances have long been a topic that fascinates the public, sparking deep curiosity and sometimes fear about things we have yet to fully understand. In a vast country like the United States, with its countless pristine and majestic natural landscapes, there is no shortage of stories about people suddenly vanishing without a trace. These disappearances, often occurring in dense forests, national parks, or remote and less traveled wilderness areas, have become great mysteries that no rational explanation can fully satisfy the public's curiosity. For many, these disappearances evoke a sense of unease about the power and mystery of nature. Nature, no matter how beautiful and enchanting, always harbors dangers and secrets that humans can hardly control or foresee. Majestic mountains, dense forests, or swift rivers are not only places to admire the beauty of creation, but sometimes also deadly traps for those who venture into them without foreseeing the risks. A disappearance may begin as a simple excursion into nature, a hike to enjoy the fresh air and tranquility of the mountains and forests. But in the blink of an eye, those on the journey can disappear completely, leaving no trace behind, making family, friends, and investigators wonder. What happened? Where did these people go? Did they get lost in nature's labyrinth, or was there some mysterious force that swept them away without anyone knowing? These questions remain unanswered. In this episode, let's explore a strange disappearance in the United States. Over the past year, several strange disappearances have been reported in national parks and wilderness areas across the United States. These stories not only astonish investigators, but also haunt those intrigued by the unexplained phenomena in life. Today, we will begin our journey to explore these mysterious disappearances, starting with the case of Rodney Letterman, who vanished in Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas, in August 2017. Early on the morning of August 27th, Rodney and his friend left their campsite and drove to the starting point of the Butterfield Trail. They parked their car and began their trek along narrow paths surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains. Both were excited about the journey, expecting to have a wonderful day exploring the wilderness. However, after about a mile of hiking, Rodney began to feel unwell. He had forgotten to bring his blood pressure medication and felt the need to rest. He sat down on the trail, told his friend that he needed his medication, and his friend quickly headed back to the car to retrieve it for Rodney. At that time, Rodney had a large water bottle with him, and everyone assumed he would stay in that spot to rest until his friend returned. But when his friend came back after a short time, Rodney was no longer there. There were no signs indicating that he had been attacked or had an accident. Rodney seemed to have vanished without leaving any trace. One of the first theories proposed was that Rodney might have experienced a severe issue related to his high blood pressure. Hypertension can cause various symptoms, from severe headaches, nosebleeds, fatigue, confusion, and vision problems. If Rodney's condition worsened, it's possible that he became disoriented and wandered into the forest without realizing where he was going. Another scenario suggested was that Rodney might have experienced hallucinations due to high blood pressure. Many people with severe hypertension have reported experiencing hallucinations, seeing images or objects that are not real. It's possible that Rodney saw something he believed was real and left the spot to either follow or avoid it. However, all these theories are merely speculation. No one knows for sure what happened to Rodney on that day. The lack of any trace of him makes everything even more mysterious. His friend raised the alarm and notified the authorities. The search for Rodney was organized methodically and extensively in the area of Devil's Den State Park. They conducted searches using horses, ATVs, on foot, drones, helicopters with thermal imaging technology, and even search dogs. Over the next week, search teams scoured more than 4,000 acres of land, both within and around the park. The search uncovered some clues on a specific trail, where there were a few primitive campsites. At one of these campsites, Rodney's cell phone, phone charger, and flashlight were found. It is important to note that at this location, there was no evidence of a struggle or any similar signs. Therefore, it does not appear that Rodney had any conflict with another person. Of course, Rodney was not found with these items. What we know is that Letterman had some health issues, and his medication was left in his friend's car, said Lieutenant Brett Hagen. We analyzed the phone and got some clues, but we still haven't been able to locate Letterman. Hagen stated that at this point, they still do not know whether something happened to Letterman in the park, if he may have hitched a ride out with another friend, or if any criminal activity was involved. It's strange that the authorities said the phone provided them with some clues, because the Dennis Park area had no clear information at the time of the disappearance. I'm not sure what might be relevant, other than the possibility that Rodney planned to intentionally disappear or something else. And clearly, that's just speculation, but it's hard to imagine anything else. On February 25, 2019, a hiker exploring Devil's Den Park discovered a skull and some skeletal remains in the woods near a trail. These remains were later sent to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for further examination, where they were confirmed to be those of Rodney Letterman. According to StrangeOutdoors.com, park officials stated that the area where the remains were found was 3 miles from the visitor center and actually on private land, surrounded by property belonging to the U.S. Forest Service. This area is typically difficult to access, and Tim Scott, deputy superintendent of Devil's Den Park, said he was surprised that the hiker found that remote spot due to the rugged terrain. Although some hunters and a few hikers occasionally venture into that area, it is not a popular destination and is not easily accessible, even by vehicle. Another interesting point about this discovery is that the area where the remains were found had been searched nearly 2 years earlier, in 2017. This means that Rodney was found in a location that had previously been searched, and perhaps he ended up there later. No one fully understands what happened to Rodney, and almost every question remains unanswered. Why did he leave the area when his friend went back to the car? Why did he seemingly abandon his gear at the campsite? How could he avoid all the searches only to end up in a place that had already been searched? What were the clues authorities found related to his phone, and how might they be relevant in this situation? Ultimately, it seems that what really happened to Rodney may never be fully understood. Rodney Letterman's disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries of Devil's Den State Park. Even though his body has been found, no one can fully comprehend what happened during the final hours of his life. When Mark's body was found, the search team also discovered several items such as a canoe, a paddle, and a personal flotation device scattered along the shore of the lake. However, there was no trace of Kim, Mark's half-brother. The search continued on a large scale, but worsening weather conditions made the search increasingly difficult. The first question investigators asked was, what really happened to Mark and Kim? With their experience, both men were undoubtedly aware of the dangers they could face at Yellowstone, especially when boating on Shoshone Lake. Mark's body was found on the eastern shore of the lake, but there were no immediate clear signs of the cause of death. A subsequent autopsy determined that Mark died of hypothermia, not drowning as many initially thought. This complicated the case further because, if Mark didn't drown, why wasn't he wearing his personal flotation device? Did he remove it before falling into the water, or did something else happen? Moreover, there are still many questions about why Kim has not been found. Despite extensive searches around the lake, including the use of sonar equipment to detect underwater clues, no trace of Kim has emerged. Rescue teams also swept through the surrounding trails and forests, but all efforts yielded no results. Yellowstone is notorious for its rapidly changing and unpredictable weather. At the time of Mark and Kim's disappearance, the first snowstorm of the season had hit, causing temperatures to drop sharply and creating extremely harsh weather conditions. The strong winds and low water temperatures at Shoshone Lake created an extremely dangerous environment for anyone boating on. Kim was an experienced individual in dealing with dangerous waters, and he certainly understood the risks involved. However, something happened that caused both brothers to find themselves in a dangerous situation, leading to Mark's death. The troubling part is that no one knows exactly what happened in their final moments at Shoshone Lake. Even though Mark's body was found, Kim's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. There's no trace of where Kim went, or what he encountered. Investigators and their family members are still searching for answers, but this case seems to be becoming more perplexing. After approximately 3 weeks of searching, the effort was scaled back. The search for Kim continued for nearly 3 weeks, utilizing helicopters, boats, sonar technology, and ground teams. Park officials stated that the park would continue limited search efforts as long as conditions permitted for the remainder of the year. And that was the end of all leads. Over a year has passed and Kim still has not been found. It's strange that no traces have been discovered. If he were in the water, you would expect to find his life jacket. Perhaps he wasn't wearing it. That seems unlikely given his background and experience. However, anything said now is purely speculative. In the end, it appears that this time, we still don't have a clear understanding of what happened at the lake. This is a case I will continue to follow. The disappearance of Mark O'Neill and Kim Crum is one of the most mysterious cases in Yellowstone National Park. Despite numerous search efforts, no one has been able to understand what really happened to them during their final days in the wilderness. Next is a case with a very fitting title given by a reporter from the Dover, New Philadelphia Times. A disappearance that baffles investigators in Arkansas. Gloria McDonald, 68, went missing in Queen Wilhelmina State Park on January 26, 2001. On that day, Gloria, along with her husband, Daniel Shawn, her son, and Shawn's girlfriend, planned to spend the day hiking in the park. The article begins with a description of their quiet breakfast in a town not far from the Oklahoma border. After breakfast, Daniel McDonald and the 3 family members drove up a nearby mountain to hike the Lover's Leap Trail. After they had breakfast and arrived at the trail, they began their hike. It seems that the area had been affected by bad weather and strong winds before they arrived, as some trees had fallen. This wasn't really Gloria's idea of a fun time, at least from what I can gather, but she agreed to join the family. However, it appears that due to the weather damage, the hike became more challenging, and she didn't enjoy it. At one point during the hike, the group encountered a large fallen tree blocking their path. It seems this was the moment Gloria decided to turn back to the parking lot and the nearby gift shop. That moment appears to be the turning point of the entire incident. Faced with the fallen tree blocking the path, Gloria decided that she didn't want to continue. She informed the family that she would return to the parking lot and the nearby gift shop. Despite the bad weather and difficult terrain, she felt that turning back would be safer. Daniel and the rest of the group continued their hike, unaware that this would be the last time they saw Gloria. Within 30 minutes, Gloria had completely disappeared without a trace. What makes Gloria's disappearance so strange is the speed at which she vanished. She was only a short distance from the parking lot, and there was no reason to think she would be in danger walking back. However, when Daniel and his group arrived at the gift shop, Gloria was not there, and no one had seen her on the way. Authorities were quickly notified of Gloria's disappearance and launched a large-scale search in the park. Polk County Sheriff Mike Ogles led the search and investigation, but all efforts were in vain. There were no footprints, no abandoned items, and no signs indicating that Gloria had been in an accident or had been attacked. This led to various theories about what might have happened to Gloria. Did she get lost in the woods and was unable to find her way back to the trail? Or did she encounter some threat and was abducted? Some people even speculated that she might have deliberately run away from her life. But there was no evidence to support this theory. Sheriff Mike Ogles said, "We have no motive, no evidence. We have nothing. We are faced with a situation where the group had walked about 250 yards along a cleared trail, but when Gloria decided to turn back, something completely unusual happened. The situation puzzled authorities to the point that they began considering Daniel, Gloria's husband, as a suspect. This happened despite the fact that 3 others were with Gloria when she decided to turn back. While not impossible, this would mean that all 3 members of the group, including their son, would have to be lying. Daniel complained to authorities that they were wasting time instead of trying to find his wife. As this situation dragged on, he requested to take a lie detector test, which he passed. The next day, Authorities brought in search dogs to the scene, but they found no trace. There was nothing left behind, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that Gloria had left the trail. At least, there were no footprints or any similar signs. One of the factors that made this disappearance even more mysterious was that Gloria was wearing a bright yellow jacket and had striking red hair. With such attire, she would have been easily visible, but no one in the group saw her after she turned back to the parking lot. There was no one else in the area that day, and no one reported seeing her after she left the group. Furthermore, the police found no signs of any altercation or struggle, making the theory of an attack or abduction hard to believe. However, there was no evidence to suggest that Gloria intentionally ran away or left the trail. The mysteries surrounding this disappearance continue to baffle investigators. Was there an unknown third party present? We may never know for sure, and all that remains is the fact that the search dogs never picked up a scent, and no clues were ever found, not on foot or from the air. So what happened to Gloria MacDonald? Where did she go? The search for Gloria lasted for several weeks, involving rescue personnel, police, and volunteers. Search teams used sniffer dogs, helicopters, and modern equipment to scour the entire park, but all efforts were in vain. No trace of Gloria was ever found, and after weeks of fruitless searching, the search was called off. Gloria's family endured immense pain and despair, not knowing what had happened to their loved one. They couldn't comprehend how she could disappear completely without leaving any trace. This case has become one of the greatest mysteries, Queen Wilhelmina State Park, and to this day, it remains unsolved. The disappearance of Gloria MacDonald has left many unanswered questions. How could a woman vanish within 30 minutes without leaving any trace? Did she see something unusual and decide to leave the trail? Or did she encounter some unknown threat? Theories about this disappearance persist, but no one can be certain about what really happened to Gloria on that fateful day. Her disappearance serves as a painful reminder of the risks involved in exploring the wilderness, and it remains a mystery that investigators have yet to solve. The disappearance of Bonnie Lee Edwards on January 9, 1965, is another enigmatic story that raises many questions about what really happened to the 10-year-old girl. Bonnie disappeared just 100 yards from her home, in an area she knew well. The search began that same night and lasted for 24 hours. But when Bonnie's body was found, it was in a location that had already been thoroughly searched several times before. Bonnie Lee Edwards, a 10-year-old girl with special educational needs, did not develop at the same pace as other children her age. Although she was 10 years old, her abilities were comparable to those of a 6-year-old, which presented Bonnie with many challenges in her daily life. Despite these difficulties, Bonnie was a happy child who loved playing with friends, exploring the world around her. January 9, 1965, began as an ordinary day on Bonnie's family farm, located about 100 miles from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Bonnie and some of her friends were playing near her home, in an area she knew well. Despite her learning difficulties, Bonnie had frequently traveled between her home and this area without any problems. Around 4:30 p.m., the weather began to deteriorate, heavy rain and a chill in the air. Bonnie told her friends that she was tired and wanted to go back home. Her friends witnessed this and saw Bonnie start walking toward her house, but that was the last time they saw her. When Bonnie did not return home as expected, her family became worried and reported her missing. Within hours, a large-scale search was launched, involving over 1,000 people, including police, volunteers, and local residents. They searched the entire area around the family's farm, in the woods, and along nearby trails. The search continued throughout the night in harsh weather conditions. Old rain and sleet falling continuously. The search team scoured every nook and cranny of the area, but no trace of Bonnie was found. There were no footprints, no abandoned belongings, and no signs of a struggle. Everything seemed to have vanished along with the little girl. The next morning, the body of Bonnie Lee Edwards was found. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. She was found curled up under a pile of branches, in an area that had been searched 3 times before, with no previous sign of her. This left those involved in the search utterly baffled. How could Bonnie have ended up in a place that had already been thoroughly searched? Had she been there the entire time without being noticed? Or did something happen after that area was last checked? These questions remain unanswered, and no one can explain how Bonnie could disappear and then reappear in that spot. The story of Bonnie Lee Edwards' disappearance has sparked various theories. Some believe that she might have gotten lost in the woods and was unable to find her way back home. However, the fact that Bonnie was only about 100 yards from her house and very familiar with the area makes this theory hard to believe. Another theory is that Bonnie might have been abducted or met with some kind of accident, but there were no signs indicating that she had been attacked or was in danger. Additionally, the absence of footprints or any signs of a struggle made the theory of an attack difficult to prove. Some have also suggested that Bonnie might have been placed in that area after the initial search had ended. However, there is no evidence to support this theory, and the police found no signs of foul play. What makes this case particularly strange is that Bonnie was found in an area that had been searched multiple times before. The search teams had combed the area throughout the night, despite the poor lighting conditions. Yet they remained puzzled as to how they could have missed Bonnie during the initial search. The searchers were also confused by the fact that there were no signs indicating how Bonnie had gotten to the place where she was found. There were no footprints or any other clues pointing to her journey. The lack of any trace in near-freezing weather conditions only added to the oddity of the case. In the end, the disappearance and death of Bonnie Lee Edwards remain an unsolved mystery. Her family has had to endure the pain of losing a loved one without knowing exactly what happened. The search efforts have concluded, but the question of how Bonnie could disappear just a short distance from home and then be found in an area that had already been searched multiple times still lingers. This event has become one of the most mysterious disappearances near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It serves as a lesson about the risks of exploring the wilderness, even when the area seems safe and familiar. The disappearance of Geraldine Markline, a 2-year-old girl in rural Pennsylvania, has become a strange chapter in the history of mysterious disappearances. Although Geraldine was fortunately found safe after 48 hours, what happened to her during that time still leaves many unanswered questions. Geraldine disappeared when her mother was not home, and she was under the care of her 14-year-old brother, Luther. Everything seemed normal as Luther took the younger siblings outside to collect leaves for livestock feed. However, in the brief moment when Luther went inside to get food and water, Geraldine vanished without a trace. After Geraldine disappeared, Luther spent all his time searching for her. However, the farmhouse was in a remote area, and there was no immediate help from neighbors or the police. The official search only began when Geraldine's mother returned home. More than 200 people, including professional search teams and local residents, participated in the search that lasted all night Saturday and throughout Sunday. They scoured the area around the house, from dense forests to nearby trails. There was no sign of where Geraldine had gone. The search was conducted in cold weather conditions, with nighttime temperatures dropping close to freezing. The searchers were concerned that if Geraldine was not found soon, she might not survive the night in such harsh condition. Anxiety and desperation grew as each hour passed without any trace of the little girl. Fortunately, after 48 hours missing, Geraldine was found safe on Monday morning. She was discovered by her grandfather, Jacob Albert, and her cousin Clayton in the Miller-Kiwi forest about 1.5 miles from her home. Strangely, although Geraldine had been outside for 2 days and nights, she was not significantly affected by the cold weather. When found, she was dressed only in light clothing, and her hat, coat, 1 shoe, and 1 sock were missing. Geraldine was wrapped in a blanket by the rescuers and quickly taken home for a health check. What surprised many was that she showed no signs of hypothermia or exhaustion. Instead, she had only a few minor scratches on her body, suggesting that she had spent time in the wilderness but had not been seriously affected. The search efforts have concluded, but the question of how Bonnie could disappear just a short distance from home and then be found in an area that had already been searched multiple times still lingers. This event has become one of the most mysterious disappearances near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It serves as a lesson about the risks of exploring the wilderness, even when the area seems safe and familiar. The disappearance of Geraldine Markline, a 2-year-old girl in rural Pennsylvania, has become a strange chapter in the history of mysterious disappearances. Although Geraldine was fortunately found safe after 48 hours, what happened to her during that time still leaves many unanswered questions. Geraldine disappeared when her mother was not home, and she was under the care of her 14-year-old brother, Luther. Everything seemed normal as Luther took the younger siblings outside to collect leaves for livestock feed. However, in the brief moment when Luther went inside to get food and water, Geraldine vanished without a trace. After Geraldine disappeared, Luther spent all his time searching for her. However, the farmhouse was in a remote area, and there was no immediate help from neighbors or the police. The official search only began when Geraldine's mother returned home. More than 200 people, including professional search teams and local residents, participated in the search that lasted all night Saturday and throughout Sunday. They scoured the area around the house, from dense forests to nearby trails. There was no sign of where Geraldine had gone. The search was conducted in cold weather conditions, with nighttime temperatures dropping close to freezing. The searchers were concerned that if Geraldine was not found soon, she might not survive the night in such harsh conditions. Anxiety and desperation grew as each hour passed without any trace of the little girl. Fortunately, after 48 hours missing, Geraldine was found safe on Monday morning. She was discovered by her grandfather, Jacob Albert, and her cousin Clayton in the Miller-Kiwi Forest about 1.5 miles from her home. Strangely, although Geraldine had been outside for 2 days and nights, she was not significantly affected by the cold weather. When found, she was dressed only in light clothing, and her hat, coat, 1 shoe, and 1 sock were missing. Geraldine was wrapped in a blanket by the rescuers and quickly taken home for a health check. What surprised many was that she showed no signs of hypothermia or exhaustion. Instead, she had only a few minor scratches on her body, suggesting that she had spent time in the wilderness but had not been seriously affected. Geraldine's safe return led to various theories about what might have really happened to her. One of the common theories was that Geraldine might have been kidnapped and later released in the forest. This theory was supported by the fact there were no traces of her during the initial search, as well as her lack of impact from the harsh weather. However, there was no evidence to suggest that Geraldine had been kidnapped. There were no signs of abuse or serious injury on her body. Moreover, the disappearance of items such as her hat, coat, 1 shoe, and 1 sock also made this theory less convincing. If Geraldine had been kidnapped, why would the abductor take those items? And why would they release her in the forest without leaving any trace? Ultimately, no one knows exactly what happened to Geraldine during those 2 days of her disappearance. It's possible she wandered through the woods on her own and was fortunate not to suffer serious harm. But there might also be something else, more mysterious and harder to explain, that happened to her. The lack of footprints or any traces of her during the search left many feeling confused and baffled. Geraldine's safe return was a miracle. Questions about what happened to her still remain. Did she survive in the forest on her own, or did someone help her without leaving any trace? And why did her belongings mysteriously disappear? These questions may never be answered, and the story of Geraldine Markline's disappearance and return will continue to be one of America's unresolved mysteries. The disappearance of Pamela Hollingworth, 5-year-old girl in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, on September 28, 1941, attracted significant public attention and became one of the most intriguing and mysterious missing person cases. Although the little girl was fortunately found after being missing for 9 days, the story of what happened to her during that time still leaves many unanswered questions. Pamela Hollingworth disappeared while on a picnic with her family in a New Hampshire state reservation. The family, consisting of Pamela's parents, brother, and grandparents, had stopped at a small creek area to rest. In the brief moment when the two children, Teddy and Pamela, wandered about 100 yards from their parents, Pamela vanished without a trace. As soon as Pamela went missing, the family searched for her in the forest for 3 hours but found no clues. An official search was quickly launched, involving over 300 people, including police, rescuers, and local volunteers. They scoured the surrounding forest area, creek, and nearby trails, but no trace of Pamela was found. What surprised everyone was that Pamela went missing in an area not far from the center of the reservation, and no one thought she could have gone so far that she couldn't be found in such a short time. Many began to suspect that Pamela might have been kidnapped by a third party, especially after reports that a woman had seen a child wandering near a rural road not far from the picnic area. During the 9-day search, the weather conditions were extremely harsh, with temperatures below freezing and heavy rain falling continuously. This made everyone even more worried about Pamela's safety, especially since she was only wearing light clothing and had no food or shelter. After 9 days of being missing, Pamela Hollingworth was finally found sitting by a creek, about 2 miles from where she had disappeared. When she was found, she was in relatively stable health, although her feet were swollen due to poor circulation. This astonished the doctors and those involved in the search, as they couldn't explain how Pamela had survived in such cold and harsh weather conditions without food or water. Pamela was eventually found sitting by a creek, about 2 miles, approximately 3.2 kilometers from where she had gone missing. The doctor reported that her health was completely normal, except for her swollen feet due to poor blood circulation, which could be remedied with warmth and medical care. I guess my parents got lost. I was looking for them since Sunday but couldn't find them. I just wandered around looking. I walked a lot. I didn't eat any berries because I was afraid I might get sick. I didn't see anyone the whole time. No, I'm sure I didn't see anyone. I lost my hair ribbons, didn't I? But I didn't take them off. I didn't take off my shoes either because I didn't want to hurt my feet, but they still hurt. Pamela was found in a confused state, and she seemed somewhat disoriented when she later made these statements. But of course, she was only 5 years old and had been missing for 9 days without food, so that isn't too surprising. The entire ordeal undoubtedly left her bewildered and traumatized. This is particularly interesting because, after she was found, law enforcement initially repeated the opinion that they believed someone had been with her, but after speaking with Pamela, they changed their stance and concluded that she had been alone. The news of her safe return led some to believe that she had been kidnapped and later released by a third party. But Dr. Charles Smith, who examined her after she was taken to the hospital, said there was no sign that she had left the forest. Clarify what is being suggested here is that there were no signs of any sexual assault or anything similar. Pamela's mother said she didn't really believe her daughter had been in the forest. Many people, including experienced hunters and soldiers, found it hard to believe in the girl's resilience to the extent that they openly expressed their belief that she had been held in a cabin or a similar location and then released onto a mountain trail. Even after hearing Pamela's account, there were still those who remained convinced that something wasn't right. They found it strange that she could avoid being found for such a long time, while also staying warm in the cold weather conditions. It seems that law enforcement also faced criticism from the local public. People believed there was more mystery to the story than met the eye. Acknowledging this skepticism, the lead investigator summoned reporters to his office for a midnight press conference and stated, "I have found no evidence to support the theory that the girl was kidnapped." The doctor said that when he conducted a full examination of the girl, she was barely affected by exposure to the environment. She had only a few minor scratches, except for scraped knees from crawling on the ground. The doctors caring for her mentioned that she experienced occasional nightmares, sometimes crying out in her sleep about the wetness or rain. But that wasn't considered a bad sign and was deemed normal. Perhaps what makes this story even more remarkable is that not only were the temperatures consistently near or below freezing during that time, but there was also a significant amount of rain. Perfect recipe for hypothermia. That essentially brings the story to a close. The story of Jerry Hayes, a 5-year-old boy who mysteriously disappeared in November 1938 at Rucker Canyon, located in the Chiricahua Mountains of Arizona, is one of the most haunting and inexplicable disappearances in American history. The incident occurred when Jerry was on a hunting and camping trip with his parents. While the family was resting at the camp, Jerry disappeared from their sight without leaving any trace. As soon as they realized Jerry was missing, his parents searched the area around the camp, calling out his name but receiving no response. Both parents were unclear about the exact moment Jerry vanished and why he left the safety of the camp. Did something in the forest lure Jerry away? Or did he follow a childlike curiosity and chase after an animal? These questions remain unanswered. The search for Jerry was massive. A group of 400 police officers and volunteers searched Rucker Canyon in vain last night for Jerry, who had been missing for over 28 hours. It's important to emphasize that this search started very quickly, within just an hour of the boy's disappearance, with a small initial group, before expanding as the news spread. However, they still couldn't find any trace of him. They called out his name, but received no response. As the search progressed, one theory began to stand out, that Jerry might have been kidnapped. This theory emerged because, as the number of searchers increased and they spread out across the forest, no one saw or found any signs indicating that Jerry was still there. Father, somewhat mysteriously, kept insisting that he felt Jerry was still in the area and that they just couldn't find him. He maintained this belief throughout the search, while other ideas were considered and circulated. Nonetheless, the search continued to escalate, and even the military was sent to assist. Could the body have slipped away from that spot? The clear issue here is that if the boy wasn't wearing a life jacket, you would think the cause of death would be drowning rather than hypothermia. Or perhaps the reports weren't written clearly, and the boy was wearing a life jacket, but that certainly isn't indicated. Either way, back to the Salt Lake Tribune, the rescue teams continued searching for Kim. Teams were searching near Shoshone Lake by foot, boat, and with the help of search dogs, helicopters, and sonar equipment. However, the dogs did not pick up Kim's scent, and the sonar equipment also failed to locate Kim, even though Occam's razor might suggest that the boy was likely under the lake. We have no evidence of this, and the searches, as well as the sonar scans, yielded no results. It is estimated that in waters this cold, a person could survive for only 20 to 30 minutes after falling in, during which time the stages of hypothermia would fully set in. This raises an interesting point to consider. For some reason, the boy may not have been wearing his life jacket, or he may have drifted away. At least from my understanding of these devices, that seems unavoidable. However, that never happened. So, either the boy wasn't wearing a life jacket, it somehow drifted away and was never found, or the boy wasn't in the lake. After about 3 weeks of searching, the effort was scaled back. The search for Kim continued for nearly 3 weeks, using helicopters, boats, sonar technology, and ground rescue teams. Park officials stated that the park would continue limited search efforts as long as conditions permitted for the remainder of the year. That was also the end of the information trail. More than a year has passed, and Kim still hasn't been found. It seems strange that no trace has been discovered. If the boy had been in the water, you would expect that at least his life jacket would have been found, or perhaps he wasn't wearing one. That seems unlikely, given the boy's background and expertise. However, anything said now is purely speculation. Ultimately, it seems that this time we don't really understand what happened at the lake. Unfortunately, as mentioned, the source of the sound was not identified at the location of the footprints. Over 1,000 people searched the entire area, found no other trace of Jerry. The sheriff remained convinced that Jerry had been taken from the area by a third party. Hundreds of searchers in Rucker Canyon and the surrounding 50-square-mile area were planning to call off the search after a week, suspecting that the boy had been kidnapped. Sheriff Pruitt, who coordinated the efforts of this large team, was quoted saying, "If we don't find the boy today, I'll know that he was taken out of here by car." Jerry's father refused to give up, continuing to say that he still believed Jerry was somewhere nearby and alive. However, a few days later, Forest Service employees found the body of Jerry Hayes. Jerry Hayes' body was found 1.5 miles from Buckskin Canyon Saddle. This discovery brought the search, involving nearly 1,000 people, to a close. Sheriff Pruitt, who had been wrong about everything up to this point, said, "Perhaps Jerry froze to death on the first night he went missing." Meanwhile, this information was reported shortly after Jerry Hayes' body was found high up on the canyon's slope, where the boy had collapsed from exhaustion after wandering away from his parents' camp. 3 Forest Service employees found the body about 4.5 miles from the camp. The body had only a few scratches from the wandering. The boy had climbed about 1,000 feet up the canyon slope. When the rangers found the body, they noticed that Jerry was not wearing his outer jacket and also realized that he had lost both his shoes. Typically, young children tend to descend rather than climb up, as going down is easier and they quickly tire from climbing. So, it remains unclear what exactly happened here, as well as how long the boy survived. Some searchers speculated that Jerry might have wandered for several days before reaching his final position, while the sheriff believed the boy had died on the first night. The official cause of death was either not determined or not reported, as I couldn't find any further articles on this, and it was never mentioned again. However, based on what has been said, I lean towards the idea that the death was likely not due to a fall. The point made is that the only injuries the boy sustained were scratches, so perhaps exposure to the elements played a more significant role. The story of Eloise Lindsay, a 22-year-old woman from Atlanta, Georgia, left many people shocked. Eloise Lindsay began her journey on November 4, 1989, with the goal of completing a 43.3-mile hike from Table Rock State Park to Whitewater Falls in Oconee County. This wasn't her first time undertaking such a long hike, and she had prepared everything necessary for her 7-day journey. However, by November 11, Eloise had not yet arrived at her destination, and her friend, who was supposed to pick her up, became worried and reported her missing. Authorities immediately launched a large-scale search involving police, volunteers, and even search dogs, but all efforts were in vain. Not a trace of Eloise was found, and no hikers in the area had seen her at any point. 16 days after she went missing, on November 21, 1989, Eloise was unexpectedly found by a hunter in a state of panic and exhaustion, about 5 miles off the trail she had planned to follow. Strangely, she had come very close to the end of her journey, but was unable to complete it. She wasn't found thanks to the search effort. She was actually discovered by a hunter, about 5 miles from the trail and near the end of her planned hike. So, she had gotten quite close to her destination. On November 7th, 3 days into her journey, she felt as if she was being chased through the woods by a group of men. Until this morning, I felt like I was being chased. I never saw them. I never wanted to see them. But I heard them talking about me. It might be called paranoia, but I don't think so, as they kept following my trail the whole time. I just know that I was terrified for those 2 weeks. She said she had discarded her backpack, which contained a week's worth of supplies, early on to increase her speed and escape them. So she must have been completely terrified here. She had abandoned the supplies that would keep her alive. Eloise recounted that during that time, she heard helicopters flying overhead and knew they were likely searching for her. But her fear of being discovered by those she believed were following her prevented her from calling out for help. When she finally encountered the hunter, she was still in a state of confusion and uncertain whether she could trust him. Fortunately, the hunter reassured her and helped her. Let's hear more of what she had to say. Speaking about the men who allegedly followed her, she said, "I could sense that they didn't have good intentions, but there was no clear indication that they meant to harm me. I used my instincts like a deer. I could hear them using walkie-talkie, and they were talking about me." When asked how she survived, she said she drank water from streams and kept some dried apples from a backpack. She also mentioned finding some old donuts in a tree. It was never explained how she found those donuts. She said she also heard helicopters and understood that they were probably looking for her. She was too afraid to try to attract their attention, as that might have given away her position to the people she believed were following her. She also said that when she finally met the hunter, she was delirious and told the man that she didn't know if she could trust him. Fortunately, he was able to reassure her, and he took her to his truck and got help. Authorities made some comments about her experience. From the very beginning, before the search was initiated, she became frightened or paranoid that someone was trying to chase her down. However, we don't believe that anyone was actually pursuing her, even though the hiker insisted that there were men chasing her along the trail. Authorities stated that they had no evidence of this and had no plans to investigate further. Officials who interviewed the hiker said the most likely scenario was that she became frightened and panicked when she saw hunters and later thought her rescuers were the same men who had been chasing her. The sheriff added, "We don't believe anyone was chasing her. I can only imagine that Eloise must have felt very abandoned, as she remained adamant that there were people in the woods with her, a group of them, during the entire search. There were no signs indicating that others were there with her off the trail. No footprints were found, including hers. Nothing suggested that there was a group of people near her. I think the authorities' hypothesis is actually quite reasonable, but I get the sense that she felt gaslighted because she was so certain she was not alone. Authorities suggested that at some point she might have been hiding from the search efforts. In the end, it's not really clear what happened, and I would also point out that the issues began for her on November 7th. Of course, she wasn't reported missing until November 11th, meaning that much of the time she was having these experiences of being followed and harassed, there wasn't actually anyone searching for her. So, while it may be true that she was confused and hid from the search teams at some point, that couldn't have been the case for the entire time she was missing. There was no mention of her suffering from any kind of condition, and as far as I know, she hadn't hallucinated or had delusions before. Health conditions or substance abuse activities are typically reported. So what initially scared Eloise? In the end, authorities concluded that Eloise might have imagined the people chasing her, but her insistence that someone was indeed following her leaves people wondering. It's possible she was gaslighted, made to doubt herself, by the skepticism of those around her. Meanwhile, Eloise continued to believe that what she experienced was real and felt abandoned when no one believed her. Whatever the truth may be, the story of Eloise Lindsay remains a mystery. There is no clear evidence to support her account, but there is also no reason to completely dismiss it. Ultimately, Eloise's disappearance leaves behind unanswered questions and a vague sense of confusion about a deeply puzzling event. Through the thick fog of unresolved mysteries, we've journeyed through strange stories of haunting disappearances. Each story leaves its own mark, from faint traces on the trail to clues that were never deciphered. We've sought answers, but the pieces of truth always seem just out of reach. What really happened to these people? Are there unseen forces at work in those wild lands, or are these just strange coincidences? We may never know the exact answers, but it is the ambiguity and inexplicability of these stories that make them so intriguing and captivating. Each disappearance is like an unsolved puzzle, compelling us to ponder the possibilities and theories. And perhaps this is the power of these stories. They make us keep asking questions, keep searching, and keep our eyes fixed on the shadows of the unknown. Be sure to follow the channel to continue exploring more mysterious disappearances.